11 ROUNDS. I, the kid who wouldn't leave the gym, smelled like it always did, sweat gone stale in the mats, chalk dust. The metallic tang of old blood that never quite left a canvas, no matter how many times you bleached it. Mateo Reyes had stopped noticing the smell around year 3. Now it was year 11, and the smell was just what air was supposed to smell like. He was replacing a busted fluorescent tube above the speed bag when the kid walked in. Mateo knew trouble by the walk before he ever saw a face. This kid walked like the floor owed him something. 19, 20 maybe, in a tracksuit too clean for a boxing gym, gold chain doing its best impression of a heavyweight belt. He stood in the doorway long enough to make sure everyone had looked at him, and only then did he actually step inside. "You're Reyes." Not a question. "Depends who's asking and if they owe me money." Mateo didn't come down off the ladder. "Kian Ortega." The kid said it like Mateo should already know it, like it was printed on billboards somewhere Mateo just hadn't driven past yet. 15-0, 14 by knockout. "I want you to train me." Mateo finished screwing in the tube, flicked the switch, watched the bag light up white and merciless. Then he climbed down and looked at the kid properly for the first time. Pretty face. That was the first problem. Pretty faces got protected in this sport. Coddled. Kept out of wars they needed to be in to actually learn something. Second problem. He stood with his weight forward on the balls of his feet, even standing still, like his whole body was itching for something to hit. That wasn't training. That was a kid who'd never been really hurt yet and didn't know enough to be scared of it. "No," Mateo said and turned back to his ladder. "You didn't even ask why." "Don't need to. I don't train amateurs. I don't train prospects. I sweep this floor, I fix these lights, and twice a week I hold pads for a plumber who's 44 and boxes because his cardiologist told him to. That's the whole operation. You want a real trainer, there's a dozen gyms downtown with their names still in lights." "I don't want a real trainer." Kian's jaw set in a way that, for one unguarded second, made him look younger than his swagger was working overtime to hide. "I want you." "Why?" "Because you went 12 rounds with Esteban Cruz when he was undefeated and you weren't supposed to last 3. Because everybody says you had him in round 9 and you gave it back to him in round 10 because you didn't want to be the guy who finally beat Esteban Cruz. Because," the kid stopped himself, like he'd said more than he meant to. Mateo's hands went still on the ladder rail. Nobody talked about round 10. Nobody except people who'd actually watched the tape frame by frame, who cared more about what happened in a ring 14 years ago than anyone reasonably should. Most people who brought up Esteban Cruz wanted to talk about the loss. This kid wanted to talk about the thing underneath the loss, the thing Mateo had never once explained to a single soul, including himself, on a night that had ended his career and started every bad year that came after it. "Get out of my gym," Mateo said, quiet. The kid's mouth opened, some smart retort already loaded. Mateo could see it building behind his teeth, and then something in Mateo's face must have told him this wasn't a moment for it, because he closed his mouth, nodded once, sharp, and walked out. He came back the next morning at 5:45, already sweating through a hoodie, and ran the block outside the gym in the dark until Mateo unlocked the door at 6. He did that for 11 days straight. Aye. Terms and conditions. On the 12th day, Mateo let him in. "One condition," he said, before the kid could get a single word out. "You do exactly what I say, exactly when I say it, and you don't ask why, because half the time I won't know why myself until 3 weeks later. You skip that, you're out, permanently. No second chance, no begging your way back in like you did with this one. Deal. You don't get paid, you don't get promoted. This isn't a stable, I'm not a manager, I'm not calling up promoters on your behalf. If you're looking for a ladder to climb, this isn't it. Deal. And you lose the chain. You train in this gym, you look like you belong in a boxing gym, not a music video." Something flickered across Kian's face, not quite hurt, something closer to being caught at, and his hand went briefly to his collarbone where the gold sat. "It was my brother's." Mateo hadn't expected that. He filed it away without commenting on it, the way you filed away every small, true thing a fighter let slip before they learned to keep their guard up outside the ring too. Keep it in your bag when you're on the floor. Don't need it catching on anything. "Deal," Kian said again, softer this time, and something about the way he said it made Mateo suspect this kid had said yes to a lot of terms in his life without anybody meaning to give him something fair in return. They started that morning. Mateo had him skip rope for 20 minutes straight without stopping. No music, no mirror, nothing but the thwip of the rope and his own breathing to keep time by. Kian's footwork was flashy and wrong. The kind of wrong that got you knockouts against overmatched amateurs, and got you knocked cold against anyone who actually knew what they were doing. By minute 12, his shoulders were burning and his flash was gone, and what was left was a kid gritting his teeth, refusing to stop, refusing to ask for water, refusing. Mateo understood after the third week of watching him do this exact thing over and over, to give Mateo any excuse to say he wasn't tough enough to be here. Mateo didn't correct his footwork that first day. He just watched, arms crossed, and let the kid wear himself down to something honest. Aye. What the tape doesn't show, it took 6 weeks before Kian asked about round 10 directly, and by then Mateo almost wished he'd asked on day 1, when Mateo still had the emotional distance to lie cleanly. They were sitting on the ring apron after a session. Kian's hands still wrapped, sweat cooling on both of them. The gym empty except for the plumber mopping the far corner because Mateo made everyone clean up after themselves regardless of age or record. I watched the fight again last night, Kian said, not looking at him, picking at the tape on his knuckles. Round 9, you had him. Clean shot, he's hurt, he's holding on, and you let him hold. You had him against the ropes and you stepped back. Kid, I'm not asking as a fan. I'm asking because I need to understand what I'm supposed to become, and I don't understand what happened in that round, and it's the only thing about you I don't understand. Mateo looked at the ring lights, off now, dead bulbs and dust. He thought about lying. He was good at it by now, had a whole practiced answer for interviewers who'd asked over the years. I was tired. I misjudged the opening. Boxing's a game of inches. A paragraph that had the shape of truth without the weight of it. His corner threw in a white towel 2 fights before that, he said instead, surprising himself. Different fighter. Kid named Danilo, 19 years old, Cruz's stablemate, sparring partner. I trained at the same gym as Cruz back then, before I moved to my own corner. I watched that towel come in, and I watched Danilo's trainer catch him before he hit the canvas, and Danilo never woke up the same. Brain bleed. He's in a home now, doesn't recognize his own mother most days. Kian had gone very still. Round 9, I had Cruz hurt bad, same kind of hurt Danilo was in 30 seconds before that towel came in. And I stood there with my hand cocked back, and all I could see was Danilo's trainer's face when he caught him. And I thought, if I throw this and it lands the way it wants to land, I don't know if I can live with being the reason for a second one of those in the same gym in the same year. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, the old scar there, thin and pale, a souvenir from a fight nobody remembered but him. So I stepped back, gave him 30 seconds to recover. He used it. Round 10, he came back a different fighter, and I was the one who ran out of steam because you can't half commit to a 12-round fight and expect your body not to notice the lie. You threw the fight because you were scared of hurting him. I didn't throw it. I just decided somewhere in my chest that I wasn't willing to win it that way. Difference matters to me even if it didn't matter to my record. Mateo looked at him then, really looked, and saw something in the kid's face he hadn't seen before, not the hungry, prove-it look he wore into every session, but something quieter. Something that looked almost like being seen mattered more to him than being impressed. Nobody else knows that, Kian said. Nobody else asked right. They sat there a while longer, the mop bucket sloshing somewhere behind them, and Mateo felt the particular vertigo of having handed someone a piece of himself he hadn't handed anyone in 14 years, and not regretting it, which scared him more than the giving had. IV, rounds that don't show on any record by month 4, Kian was a different fighter. Not just technically, though technically, yes, his jab had gone from a flashy afterthought to something with real snap on it. His footwork had stopped being for show and started being for survival, which was the only kind of footwork that mattered once you were in with someone who actually wanted to hurt you. But it was more than that. He'd stopped performing for an invisible crowd every time he stepped on the mats. He trained now like someone who understood, on some level he probably couldn't have put into words yet, that the work itself was the point, not the audience for it. Mateo noticed other things too. Things he told himself not to notice and noticed anyway, the way you notice a splinter every single time your finger runs over the same patch of wood. The way Kian's laugh changed when it was real, lower, surprised out of him, nothing like the practiced bark he did for other people. The way he'd started leaving his gold chain at home instead of in his bag, like the gym had become somewhere he didn't need the armor. The way he'd shown up one Tuesday with a black eye that had nothing to do with boxing and wouldn't say where it came from. And Mateo had held pads for him an extra 20 minutes past their usual session, silently, because it was the only way he knew to say I noticed, and I'm not going to make you talk about it, and I'm still here. You've got to tell, Kian said one evening, unwrapping his hands slowly in no hurry to leave, which had become its own kind of tell in the last few weeks. When you're proud of me, you get quiet instead of saying it. You go quiet and you look at the middle distance like you're doing math. I'm not doing math. You absolutely are doing math. You're calculating exactly how much praise is safe to give a 20-year-old before it goes to his head. Mateo huffed something that wasn't quite a laugh. 23? You remembered my birthday. You told me your birthday was in March because you wanted the day off training and I said no, and then you sulked for a week, hard to forget. I didn't sulk. You sulked beautifully. Best sulking I've seen from a grown man in my whole life. Kian smiled at that, really smiled. The unguarded one. The one that did something uncomfortable and warm to the middle of Mateo's chest every single time he saw it, which he'd started noticing happened more often than it used to, which he'd started very deliberately not thinking too hard about. Can I ask you something and you actually answer it instead of going all mysterious old man on me? I'm 42, not 102. Why'd you let me stay? That first day, you said no. 11 days I ran that block in the freezing cold like an idiot and you could have kept saying no forever. Why'd you open the door? Mateo considered several answers. Because you reminded me of myself at that age, minus the chain. Because nobody had wanted anything from me that badly in a long time, and I didn't know what to do with being wanted. Because I watched you run past that window every morning, and something in me that I thought had gone quiet a long time ago started paying attention again. Because you didn't quit, he said instead, which was true, if not the whole truth. Everybody quits by day 4, cold's uncomfortable, pride's cheap. You made it 11. That's not the real reason. It's a real reason. It's a real reason. Not the real reason. I can tell the difference now. You taught me the difference, actually, by being terrible at hiding things from me specifically, even though you're apparently a vault for everybody else. Mateo didn't answer that. He busied himself coiling a jump rope that didn't need coiling, and felt Kian watching him do it, and felt the silence between them stretch into something that had weight and shape and a temperature all its own, and told himself, the way he'd been telling himself for weeks now, that this was just what happens between a trainer and a fighter who trusted each other, that this was ordinary, that the way his pulse had picked up was leftover adrenaline from holding pads, nothing more specific than that, nothing that needed a name. He was 42 years old and he was lying to himself like a teenager, and some small, honest part of him knew it. The offer the trouble arrived on a Thursday, the way trouble usually did, dressed well, smelling like money, driving something German and low to the ground that had no business parking outside a gym with a hand-painted sign, and a door that stuck in humid weather. Ramon Vega had been a promoter back when Mateo still fought, and he hadn't changed in 14 years except to get more polished, more expensive, more of everything that had made Mateo distrust him the first time around. He came in without knocking, looked around the gym with an expression like he was appraising it for demolition, and found Kian mid-round on the heavy bag. There he is, Vega said, like he owned the place, like he owned Kian, which Mateo realized with a cold drop in his stomach was exactly the plan. 15-0, 14 by knockout. You know what that record's worth if it's managed properly instead of sitting around gathering dust in a gym that hasn't produced a ranked fighter since before this kid could walk. Get out, Mateo said, the same 2 words he'd used on Kian 11 days into this whole thing, except this time they came out with real heat behind them. Not talking to you, old man? Vega didn't even look at him. He was watching Kian, who'd stopped hitting the bag, chest heaving, gloves still up out of pure habit. I'm talking to a fighter who deserves a real card, real purses, real television, not some charity project for a guy trying to relive his glory days through a 23-year-old. The gym went very quiet. Even the plumber in the corner stopped shadowboxing. I'll pay for the training you've already put in, Vega went on, pulling an envelope from his jacket like he'd rehearsed the gesture. Like this was a scene from a movie he'd seen too many times and believed he was starring in. Call it a consulting fee. Nobody has to be ugly about it. Kian looked at the envelope, looked at Mateo. Something passed behind his eyes that Mateo couldn't read, and for one terrible second Mateo's whole chest went cold with the certainty that this was it. This was the moment the kid remembered what he actually wanted, which was never really Mateo's gym or Mateo's patched-up wisdom. It was this. Cards, purses, television, everything Mateo had walked away from and everything Mateo, if he was honest with the ugliest part of himself, had known all along he couldn't offer. Get your envelope out of my gym, Kian said. Mateo's heart did something complicated. Kid, think about this. I have thought about it. I've thought about it every single day for 4 months. Because every single trainer in this city has slid me a card at some point. and I threw every single one of them away. And I'm about to do the same thing to yours unless you leave in the next 10 seconds. Because Reyes here is actually teaching me how to fight. And you're offering me a highlight reel. Kian's voice was flat and hard in a way Mateo had never heard from him. I didn't come here for a promoter, I came here for him. Vega's jaw tightened. He looked at Mateo with something between contempt and, disturbingly, a flicker of respect. You always were sentimental, Reyes. It's why you never made real money in this sport. Yeah, Mateo said. I've heard. Vega left. The German engine snarled away down the block, and the gym exhaled with him, and Kian stood there in the middle of the ring with his gloves still up, breathing hard, staring at Mateo like he was waiting for something. You should have taken the meeting at least, Mateo said, because he didn't trust himself to say anything closer to what he actually felt, which was something dangerously close to gratitude so large it scared him. I didn't want the meeting. Kian, I came here for him. Kian said it again, and this time there was nothing flat about it. This time his voice cracked on the word him. Cracked in a way that had nothing to do with a promoter and everything to do with 4 months of 5:45 mornings, and a shared secret about round 10, and a black eye nobody asked about, and a chain that stayed in a bag now, because the gym had stopped being a place he needed armor. God, Tio, are you actually going to make me say it in front of the plumber? The plumber, to his credit, immediately became extremely interested in a wrench he was not using. Mateo's mouth had gone dry. Say what? You know what? I need you to say it anyway. Kian pulled his gloves off, dropped them on the mat, crossed the ring in 4 strides that ate up all the careful distance they'd both spent 4 months maintaining without ever discussing why it mattered so much to maintain it. Up close his eyes were wet, furious, terrified, and underneath all of it, unmistakably wanting. I'm in love with you, Kian said. I have been since round 3 of the second week when you fixed my stance by putting your hand on my hip, and I forgot how to breathe and told myself it was just the workout. It's not the workout, it's never been the workout. And I know you're going to give me some speech about being too old for me, or being my trainer, or every reason under the sun why this is a terrible idea. And you can save it, because I've had 4 months to hear every version of that speech in my own head already, and none of them changed anything. Mateo stood there with his hands at his sides, feeling 42 years old in a way he hadn't felt in months, feeling every year of the 14 since Esteban Cruz, every year of quiet mornings alone, in a gym that smelled like chalk and old blood and nobody, to come home to at the end of it. I hold pads for a living, he said, voice rough. I fix lights that don't need fixing because it gives me something to do with my hands. I haven't let myself want something this much in 14 years because the last time I let myself want something that much, I stepped back from it in round 9 and spent the next decade telling myself that was noble instead of just scared. So don't step back this time. Kian, Tio. Kian said his name like it cost him something to say it plain, without a joke wrapped around it to make it safer. I'm not asking you to throw a fight. I'm asking you to actually be in the one that's already happening. VI. Round 9, again Mateo kissed him first in the end, which surprised them both, though it shouldn't have, because everything about the last 4 months had been building toward exactly this moment, whether either of them had let themselves admit it or not. It was not a gentle kiss. It had 4 months of held-back mornings in it, 4 months of hands on hips correcting stances that hadn't needed nearly as much correcting as the amount of time Mateo had spent doing it. 4 months of watching a kid become a man in front of him, and pretending the watching was purely professional. When they broke apart, Kian was laughing, the real laugh, low and surprised out of him, and pressed his forehead against Mateo's shoulder like he needed a second to remember how his legs worked. You could have done that in month 1 and saved us both a lot of cold showers, he said. You were 22 in month 1. Wasn't going to happen in month 1, so you were thinking about it in month 1. Shut up and go shower your actual shower, the one that isn't a metaphor. But Kian didn't move, not yet. Just stood there with his forehead against Mateo's shoulder and his hand fisted loosely in the front of Mateo's shirt. And Mateo let him stay, let himself have this, one long, unhurried minute of just standing in the quiet of a gym that had watched 14 years of his life happen without ever once giving anything back to him. Until now. 6 weeks later, Kian had his first real fight. Not for a promoter, not for television, just a regional card that a smaller outfit had put together. The kind of fight that mattered more for what it proved than what it paid. Mateo worked his corner, the way he'd worked no one's corner in 14 years. And when the bell rang for round 9, the round, everyone in that gym over the age of 30 understood exactly which round it was, and what it meant that Kian had asked specifically to be tested that far into a fight. Kian had his opponent hurt against the ropes. Hurt the way Cruz had been hurt 14 years and 1 lifetime ago. And Mateo watched from the corner with his heart in his throat, watching to see what his kid would do with a hurt man and a clean shot, and every incentive in the world to take it. Kian didn't step back. He also didn't throw the finishing shot recklessly, didn't hunt for the knockout like a kid with something to prove. He worked the man down carefully, controlled, patient, technically clean in a way that had nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with skill, until the referee stepped in on his own terms because the fight was simply, undeniably, fairly over. It wasn't Mateo's fight. It wasn't Mateo's decision in that ring. But watching it, Mateo understood that he was watching something get healed that he hadn't realized was still broken. Watching a version of Round 9 that ended the way it should have ended all those years ago, with skill winning clean instead of guilt winning ugly. And he found that his face was wet by the time Kian's arm went up and the ref called it, and he didn't particularly care who saw. Kian found him after, still sweating, gloves off, chain. He'd started wearing it again, out where people could see it. His brother's chain resting against a collarbone that had earned every inch of muscle around it the honest way, and pulled Mateo into a hug that lifted him half off his feet, laughing into his neck, alive with it. "You cried," Kian said, delighted, appalled, thrilled. The great Mateo Reyes, actually crying in public at a regional card nobody's going to remember in 5 years. "I'll remember it. Yeah. Mateo pulled back enough to look at him, sweaty, grinning, 23 years old, and entirely, finally, his own person instead of an echo of who Vega or anyone else wanted to make him, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for 14 years. "I'll remember every round of it." Kian kissed him then, right there, corner of the ring, in front of the plumber and half a regional boxing card's worth of witnesses. And if anybody had opinions about it, Mateo didn't hear them over the sound of his own heart, finally, after 14 rounds of holding back, deciding to fully, recklessly, permanently swing. Epilogue: the gym still smelled the same, chalk dust, old sweat, blood gone into the canvas so deep it would never fully wash out. Mateo had stopped noticing it years ago. But now, some mornings, there was coffee too, 2 cups instead of 1, and a chain hung on a nail by the door instead of hidden in a bag. And a kid who wasn't a kid anymore ran the block outside every morning, not because he had something to prove, but because the man waiting to unlock the door at 6 was worth running for. Nobody ever did throw in a white towel on either of them again.